First off, I want to thank Razer for supporting our event at BlizzCon and continuing to support us moving forward as we're doing these events with Blood Legion. I want to thank the Blood Legion for being willing to come here. Riggins and Abs last night, and you guys tonight. We have Affinity, and we have Schultz, who we had a conversation before this, how to pronounce his name, and Schultz is okay. And Fieldcrest. Can you guys just maybe give us a minute or so, tell us what your main is, and what you took through progression? I want to say Affinity. If I remember correctly, I've heard you on some podcasts. You play a monk, right, or a shaman, or both?
I have a shaman, but I don't really play it. So okay. For basically all of progression, I played my monk. That was more by choice than out of necessity. I really wanted to try and finish the expansion off on the monk. But then for paragons, I switched to my resto druid because there was some issues with monk RNG healing. That was a little frustrating on that fight. So I was druid for paragons, but I was on my monk for everything else.
I guess for myself, I play a discipline priest. All the other healers hate me, and I've been playing the spec for the whole tier because it's been a very strong spec.
I play Resto Shaman. I played it all through progression. The healers pretty much wouldn't let the Mana Tide sit, so also the health buff wasn't nice.
So did you choose those classes like, Affinity? You said you wanted to finish the expansion on your monk. Was that more of a personal thing, or was it? Did you guys choose your classes based on your total healer group and the way the classes complement each other, or was it just more of this class is strong for this fight?
In my case, I'm pretty fluid as far as what I'll end up playing. I joined Blood Legion on my Resto Druid, and then I went Disc for Dragon Soul, and then I went Monk for this expansion. So for me, it's kind of like whatever looks good that I feel comfortable playing at the time is kind of what I'll usually do. And then, our raid setup per boss is definitely based on what complements each other for the specific encounter, but most of the classes have been pretty solid all throughout, so we haven't seen any huge class changes between a lot of the players.
All right, and Doc in the chat room's asking why you chose Discipline and not Holy for your priest, Schultz.
Well, I've been playing this priest for pretty much the entire life cycle of the game, and I've never really... Well, I've played Holy, I've played back in Burning Crusade, the old spirit buff spec. And I was probably one of the first priests as well who played Disc in Wrath of the Lich King when there was the good old bubble spam days. And when I say good old days, I mean it was a nightmare, and it still gives me nightmares. But I don't know. Disc has always been more fun for me. It's more engaging. Holy is a lot more sitting around waiting for cooldowns, where Disc is a lot more proactive, where you can prevent a lot of damage instead of trying to heal it up, especially in a day and age where smart heals and instant heals are just, every class has them. And so Holy is just like another druid or another monk, and when you have Disc to play with, I don't really see the need for Holy.
No, that's fair. And so that leaves, I guess, Fieldcrest. Why did you take the Shaman? Is it just
Mana Tide LP?
Yeah, the healers really love Mana Tide. But no, like all through PTR testing, Shaman were like really strong. You could see the fights where they were gonna really excel at. And I was the only like really the only one playing a shaman at the time too, and a lot of the fights it felt like you needed the shaman not only for ancestral vigor, which gives the 10% extra health across the board, but also the Mana Tide for the healers, because when you go in on a progression fight, you're really like dumping your mana a lot of the time, so it really helps in those instances.
Right, and so we got you three here. What are the other healers you guys have in Blood Legion that you progressed with? What classes were they?
We had another Discipline Priest, and that made Affinity quite upset. And then we had a couple Paladins.
Gotcha. we asked this question to the tanks last night, and I agree with what Riggin said about everybody's job is equally hard, especially when you're talking about chasing a world first. But in the community, the perception is that tanks and healers have a more difficult job than DPS. So considering that, just looking at it from that standpoint, not necessarily from your specific standpoint, what is required of a healer in a guild like Blood Legion that's pushing for world first on every tier? Are you required to have an off spec or like a main alt? I think when you guys said in our little pre-show sound check.
But, yeah, we do kind of like we call it a main alt because you really should be able to play like your primary alt is about as well as your main. We don't necessarily require that healers play a healer alt, but it's usually pretty standard that the main alt of a healer is another healer that isn't their main class, so that in the event that we want to bring 3 monks to a fight, or if we want to bring 3 or 4 discipline priests, that we've got the ability to do so.
All right, well, what's it like? And again, we kind of asked this to the tanks, but what's it like healing on a progression fight when you're chasing a world first, like I just said a minute ago, without having, the prior knowledge of the fights that most of us that play WoW get with, videos and all that kind of stuff? How do you adjust, and how do you figure out how to heal? What disability, like, do you need to anticipate disability or just wait for it to happen and react to it? Like, what's it like going through that in a progression fight for you guys?
For me, anyways, with the inception of the Dungeon Journal, there really isn't a whole lot that's like that will catch you off guard. You sort of know what you're expecting going into it. Most of it is just seeing how that encounter or how the ability interacts in the encounter and then dealing with it in that sense. And then once you just get pulls in, get people familiar with the mechanics, and just play as best as you can and not mess up.
Not messing up is what most of us fail at, actually. Excuse me. Either of you other guys have anything to add to that, or?
I would go along with the repetitions and stuff. I think the healer's job sort of synergizes a lot with the tank's job, in that you're sort of anticipating damage, and like it's different for other healers, like between like disc priests and say shaman, like a throughput healer. It's pretty different because your healing is more reactionary than premeditated. But you're really just sort of like, you're figuring out the timing of when damage is going out and when tanks need big heals, when the raid needs big heals and stuff like that.
Gotcha. We're actually rolling right through this a lot faster than I expected to. So if you guys want to add anything in here, feel free to jump in and do or add anything you want. But I guess I'll go ahead and move on. Are there any, like, I know Riggin said last night, he basically swore by weak auras. I do too. And I'm not chasing world firsts. But are there any add-ons that you guys swear by? Like, weak aura seems to be like a universal.
I would say outside of weak auras, something that's not default raid frames or like Xpearl. Like as long as you're using like grid with the grid plugins, or like Voodoo or LVUI or what have you, being able to customize your raid frames, I would definitely say is a pretty close second to weak auras. But I mean, weak auras would definitely, if I had to pick one thing, it would definitely be that.
I'm actually not opposed to the default raid frames. I will agree that weak auras is huge. I had a moment last week where I accidentally updated weak auras, and it basically forced me to go to weak auras too. And so there was a boss fight where I had nothing on my screen that I'm accustomed to. And that one pull was very, like, you start to realize how dependent you become on those weak auras that monitor your like cooldowns and your buffs and all that stuff. But I do a lot of PTR testing with default raid frames, default UI, default bars, and if Blizzard could implement just a little tweaking so you could customize, like take out some debuffs like Bloodlust and Mass Res debuff, which are redundant, and then maybe even adding icon monitors on the raid frames, I think default would be fine to use.
So you guys don't really use many add-ons other than that? I mean, you guys are starting to push progression before most add-ons are working, right? I mean, I know most of them take a week. Some of them can take up to 2 weeks, after a patch or especially after an expansion. But like I imagine that the ones that most of us use, like DBM or what's the other one, Bigwigs or whatever, you guys, do you use those or do you just not rely on them?
We have bigwigs, and we'll get certain timers modified. Like Zonker's pretty good with add-ons, so he'll tweak something so that it's like an accurate timer. But for the most part, it's a general rule of thumb is unless we know that we have a modified version of the boss bigwigs file, that we shouldn't really rely on it, because it's based off of PTR stuff, and a lot of the stuff that we're doing hasn't really, like the end boss garage, for example, you haven't seen that on heroic on PTR, so they just don't have those timers. And that's one of those add-ons that they like to update like every 15 minutes after launch, and it's like, I don't know, it usually doesn't work or throws out errors for me, so I usually just leave it off.
Yeah, you can kind of run into problems with that too. If you have somebody looking at a timer for an ability that's off, and then they say that the timer was off, that's not really a very good excuse that we like to hear.
Right. Yeah, I can imagine. So somebody in the chat room, Mercenary Farah asked, what is the raid atmosphere like in Blood Legion? Like when you guys are on a progression fight, is it tense and heated, or is it more kind of laid back and a business-like approach, or what's it like in a normal raid night for you guys on a progression fight?
We're pretty serious about what we do, so there's definitely some serious moments. There's definitely some heated moments, but at the same time, it is a game, and we're doing what we enjoy doing, so there is a little bit of joking around and having fun, but we try and keep it to not during a boss pull during progression.
Yeah, I know this progression cycle, especially when it was getting late, I started busting out some really cheesy jokes. In the healer channel, at least.
I guess moving on here, and I know Riggins and Abs had an interesting answer for this, but I guess for Mists, for all of the tiers we've had in this expansion, and this is more of a personal question for you and the class you were playing as opposed to just as an overall technical standpoint, but what was the most difficult encounter for you to heal through? I guess we can start with Affinity. We'll go in alphabetical order here.
From a pure healer technical standpoint, I don't know that any fight necessarily stands out above any of the other ones as far as what's required as a healer. I would say on a personal level, my personal fight was definitely Lei Shen, but that's because there's a whole lot of moving parts with that very technical fight, a lot of stuff going on, and if you get distracted or overly tired and you're not totally focused, then you could end up dying to silly boss mechanics that are pretty obvious that they're going to hit you if you're standing there.
I'm pretty much forced to pick a fight from Siege of Orgrimmar because I only joined Blood Legion before this tier. So this is the first tier I've pushed progression with them, and it's all the boss encounters seem pushing through progression bounds harder than any farm I've done in the past with like another guild. But I'd have to say, I think I'm going to say Garrosh for me this tier, just because there were so many, like with my class, Resto Shamans only have like one personal. There were like so many finicky things I had to do just to make sure I had like enough health to survive like the intermissions and stuff like that. Like I know I was rolling like Riptide on me and Brightleaf specifically just because we're shamans and we have like a little lower health pool, and a little less reliable cooldowns, just so we could live like through the intermissions fairly easily. I know in the Terrace intermission, I was like, my heart was like pounding like every time he would slam down, just because I'd go to like 5-10% health. So I think that's probably my choice.
For me, the most, maybe, I don't know about difficult, but stressful was Paragons, and I detest the fight mostly because there's so much raid damage going on at different times, or it turns into dodge stuff while trying to heal through massive amounts of raid damage when you have combos like the Zoom, as Rig likes to put it so eloquently, and fire lines or parasites coming out. Parasites comboed with multi-shot is a lot of damage, and you have people falling over, and you always had the question being like, well, why aren't these people getting healed? And it was a very stressful encounter where you needed to be on your game for the full 12 minutes. And even then, I think on our first kill, I died fairly early to one of those avoidable mechanics.
All right, cool, thanks. I think Medi's got a question or two here from the chat room. So.
Hello. Yeah, Grass in the chat room asked, what's the average rate or turnover rate in Blood Legion?
I honestly wouldn't be able to say really off the top of my head. We maintain a lot of our raiders for a year plus. We have a veteran rank that's if you've been in the guild for a year or longer, and the vast majority of people have been in the guild for a fairly long time. I mean, you're gonna lose people between tiers or between expansions, but compared to some other guilds, I would say that our average turnover rate's probably lower than average.
I think I've noticed from me just being here just over a year myself is that a lot of the times the people that don't quite stick around are the trials that sort of come in and realize that it's a lot more time investment. There's a lot of sacrifices you might have to make personally just to raid those long hours or preparing for the new progression cycle. So we might have a higher turnover rate with new players, but once you're there and you make member, I think they stick around for quite a while.
That's cool. I guess one other thing that kind of looking forward, we've pretty much talked about what it's been like in Mist, but looking forward into what little bit we know about Warlords of Draenor, and I know I just said that in a way that pronounced that in a way that a lot of people hate. Is there anything we know a lot of it's going to change, it's still an alpha, right? But is there anything in particular, the itemization is something that I love. I play a Shadow Priest, and it's always nice for me to say, if we're in a dungeon or whatever and somebody's like, hey, you heal, I'm be like, sorry, don't have any healing gear. But I can't say that in Warlords because there is no more healing gear versus DPS gear. How are you guys looking at that? How do you feel about what they've said about itemization so far and how the stats are going to work, primarily from a healing perspective about Spirit no longer being a primary stat for healers?
Well, I mean, you've got to remember that they said that armor pieces itself wouldn't have Spirit on it, but things like trinkets, rings,
right.
Cloaks, and weapon, I think, that's still going to have it. So I don't know. It's good for the guild as a whole, I guess, that loot's going to be done that way. But at the same time, it means healers will definitely get less gear overall.
Yeah, Affinity, I think I've heard you on. I'm not sure. I've heard you on a few podcasts, and I'm not sure which one it was. You said that healers are always the last to get the gear. So, do you think it's going to be worse in this case, or?
Well, I mean, for your armor pieces, there's going to be leather boots that drop or whatever. And instead of it being oh, hey, well, it's got, intellect on it, so it's going to go to a Moonkin, and then it can go to, a Resto Druid or a Mistweaver Monk. And now it's going to be well, a Rogue could wear that, or a Feral Druid could wear that. So we're definitely going to get fewer pieces of loot in that regard, but we also don't have any competition really for the pieces that I mentioned that'll still have Spirit on it if it drops that way. So I think it'll even out a little bit. We'll have to kind of wait and see, but yeah, I mean, healers always end up getting gear last because DPS is usually going to wipe the raid. It's not really going to be healers not having enough gear that causes an issue.
For me, with the new announcements, it's the whole lack of reforging that sort of has me concerned, because right now, at least for Disc Priest, you're reforging into as much crit and or mastery as you can get at the expense of Spirit. And that sort of added to why we are so strong is that we're hitting insane levels of mastery rating and crit rating, and we can play with very low Spirit, and maybe it will even out with losing the meta gem, which is huge for mana regen. But it'll really depend on what sort of itemization they put on our gear. If it's going to be lots of Spirit and lots of crit. If it's lots of Spirit and lots of haste, I'll probably just cry.
Yeah, I guess when
we can't reforge out of those stats that we don't like, it might be interesting for sure.
Right. I didn't think about it in terms of most of the people who play WoW. I was, when they said no more reforging, I was ecstatic because But for you guys, I mean, you're min-maxing to such a degree that that's probably I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it might be a red flag for you looking forward. You know, kind of like you were just saying, is you were usually going for other stats. I never thought about it from that perspective, but for me, it's kind of like it's a pain to get a new piece of gear because then I got to go reforge 7 other things, and it kind of, for me as a casual player, it made getting loot less fun because now I got to do work. But for you guys, I never thought about it from like your guys' perspective. It makes a lot of sense that might be a cause for concern.
My initial reaction to that was like, oh, hey, that's awesome, that's great. It's gonna simplify something that's pretty complicated that really shouldn't be. And then the more I started thinking about it, the more I really was worried about, well, how is the new haste thing gonna work? Because you're gonna get like a partial tick at the end of it, and they haven't really explained that yet. And monks really don't want spirit right now. So I mean, if they fix it, how is that really gonna work? Mastery is like really bad for us right now. So what happens if all of our gear has mastery on it? So there's definitely some concerns with it, but it's one of those things that I think is the best decision for gameplay for the whole. So hopefully they just won't give us terrible itemization on gear and give us some form of options.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I said when I started that question, the game's just still in alpha. It's not even in, as far as I know, it's not even in like a friends and family beta. So Lord knows what's going to change between now and the time we actually get the game. Between the time we actually get the beta, let alone the game actually goes live. So
I would say, since they've already said that reforging's gone, that they're not going to add it back unless like something completely totally breaks that they can't fix. But yeah, I mean, there's the one thing that I'm interested in is what they're talking about spirit wise. Where they're saying, we don't have to have all of the pieces with spirit, but like early on in, at the start of an expansion, a healer's job is pretty hard because we really have to watch our mana, and then at the end of an expansion, we usually don't. So it's going to be interesting to see how that stuff plays out as far as like our base mana regen and what spirit's really going to do for us, and if it's going to hurt us at the start of the expansion or not.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I don't know. It's one of those things where there's so many things changing, but they're not changing the basic. They've said they're not going to have many class changes, so it's kind of interesting how that's all going to play together. Like last night, the guys were saying that the way Vengeance is changing, they're a fan of that because it doesn't directly affect DPS, and I don't know. It's kind of weird it's kind of weird for me as somebody who's not in a guild pushing for world first to kind of think about gear and min-maxing on a degree that you guys do. So.
Yeah, I think with the gear being able to transfer over from like an agi and strength though, pretty much the only thing that's going to change on main armor slot pieces is going to be secondary slots or secondary stats. So I think you're going to have like a lot more armor options to look at with like different secondary stats. Like you're going to have like a bunch of different of the same item, like a same chest piece with like a bunch of different secondary stats, because that's the only thing that's going to be really different.
All right. Well, we only planned on going for 20 or 30 minutes here. We've gone through all the questions that we had. Mehdi, unless you had others you want to ask, or chat room, if you have a couple that you want to ask. We've already taken a few from the chat room. While we're waiting on any questions from the chat room, if you guys got any, websites, streams, Twitter accounts, or anything you guys want to pimp to go ahead and feel free. Don't all talk at once, because I know Affinity, you stream a lot, right?
I don't stream as much as I used to, but it's probably going to pick back up whenever we get beta. Hopefully soon. Please, 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 please. So I mean, my Twitter is @AffinityBL, as is my stream. So that's AFFINITII BL, and you can also follow the just Blood Legion Twitter is always a good one. Dan will update that, and he'll retweet stuff from some of the other Raiders Twitters as well.
I have a Twitch and I have a Twitter, but I rarely ever use them. But if people ever do have questions and they're looking for an answer, you can always message me on either of them. It's @Schultez, which is basically my username spelled out full, and the same goes for Twitch. Very original.
Wow.
Fieldcrest, do you have anything like that you'd like to pimp?
Sure. I'm not like on social media really, but I do stream like pretty much every raid. You can join me and my other like 4 viewers at like twitch.tv/fieldcrest if you're up for that.
All right. Well, I guess I'm not seeing any questions in the chat room, but we do have some stuff to give away. I need to go over to my other chat here. Tonight we're giving away the Razer headset that's part of their MMO bundle. And we went out to random.org and picked a winner that way. Just got a number, picked that person out of the chat room. And that person is, let me scroll back. Where's it at? Boy, if I pronounced your name properly, I think I did last night. So if you get a chance to message Metacakes, make sure she has your shipping info, and we'll get that sent out to you. Hopefully we can get it sent out to you, and you can get it before Christmas. It'd be a nice little Christmas present show, brand new headset. So anyway, I want to thank Razer again, and I want to thank you guys from Blood Legion for taking the time out of your schedule to do this. I know you guys got a raid coming up here in 1.5 hours or so, right? Or maybe not.
That is correct.
All right. So anyway, guys, appreciate y'all coming. Guys in the chat room, appreciate you coming and hanging out with us. I guess that's it for tonight. We're going to have a few more guys on. We're going to have Riggins back on Friday, and I'm going to slaughter these names, so please bear with me, or at least one of them, Shinafei, which we talked about in our pre-show, and I can't remember what you said the actual pronunciation was. I think it was that person. Adele, Zoomkins, and is it Zenon? They're going to be here on Friday at 10 p.m. Eastern. So I guess until next Friday, or until this coming Friday, that's the 20th, 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 o'clock Pacific. If you're outside of the U.S., I'm sorry, you have to ask Google. I guess that's it for tonight. So we will, I guess, talk to you all Friday night. And again, thank you guys for taking the time out. And looking forward to catching one of your streams here soon.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Indeed.
Nerf disc.